Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jim Falk. Today we're going to be talking about an emotion that I suspect that you and I share, and that is curiosity. That's why I have my little buddy here, Curious George. You watch Perspectives Matter because you're curious to see what we're going to talk about. Well, that's why I am too. I'm curious, and I enjoy learning about the subjects we cover here on the program. But what is curiosity? Is it something that can be enhanced and shaped? And if curiosity is not really part of our DNA, our makeup, how might that impact our overall health and relations with each other? To discuss this seldom appreciated emotion, let me welcome to the studio Jennifer Zientz. She's the Deputy Director of Programs, and she's also the Head of Clinical Services with the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas at Dallas. Cassini Nazir is an assistant professor at the University of North Texas College of Visual Arts and Design. It is really great to have you with us. I'd like to really get a sense of what is curiosity?
That's a great question. You described it correctly in your intro. It's an emotion. It's something that we all feel, and it's not just something that humans feel. It's something that animals feel as well. If you have pets, you've seen your pet be curious about something.
Exactly.
As well. Sometimes that might be frustrating or annoying, and you have to sort of rein them in as well. But put simply, it's motivation to explore. And it's motivation to explore novel, uncertain, complex, or ambiguous events or situations.
Jen, why is it so important? How does it enhance our well-being?
Well, I think curiosity, it helps us to become and strengthen our flexibility of thinking, to be curious, to be possibility thinkers and seekers for options. And what we've seen is that as we get older, it is extremely important, and we all want to be agile. We want to be able to be adaptable. We want to be able to figure out when something goes wrong or something goes right, and we have choices. We want to have choices. And to be able to recognize choices requires us to be flexible in our thinking. And I think that number one, I think curiosity helps us to keep that flexibility going. But also, I think just to Cassini's, the definition of its motivation to explore, that keeps us active and engaged in our life. And that's probably one of the, there's not one, but there's so many different things that keep us healthy from a brain health perspective as we get older. Engagement is certainly one of these things, and this flexibility of thinking is another one.
We've talked before about how you can really build sort of the muscle of the brain, whether it's crossword puzzles or social interaction. And so what you're saying, by trying to approach new ideas or take on new activities, that it's the same thing. It supports that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the coolness factor is this novelty thing too, because people don't realize that we get very comfortable. Everyone knows this part. We get really comfortable in the status quo, in our routines. There's efficiency there. There's comfort there. But the brain really likes change. It likes to explore things. It likes novelty. And we all know that experience of going to a new restaurant. It may be a little like, wait a second, but then we're excited and we get more, our whole attention system kind of gets more lit up, and we're more engaged in what we're doing.
Well, before we started in our open, we were talking about where we're going to have lunch,
Yes.
and we got excited about that, right? So you can develop curiosity, and we have here on the table a graph that we're going to show to our audience that, and I'd like you to sort of walk through that because it's really interesting.
So this is a diagram that I use, and it's actually in a worksheet I use in workshops where people can shape their own curiosity. And what you're looking at are 3 time spans: a dot, which is a one-time activity; a span, which is sort of a line that ends at a specific point, which is a duration of activity; and then a path that has a dot at the beginning and an arrow at the end that indicates lasting change. But where we begin, obviously, is with a dot. We begin with the first-time activity. And that's the green indication right there of a new behavior, doing something new. Just like Jen said, you may go to a familiar restaurant but try a new menu item. There's a blue dot or blue behavior, which is trying to renew a familiar behavior, something that you've done in the past, but you may not have done it recently, so trying to revive that or reinvigorate that. Next is the purple, which is about doing something more frequently or with more intensity as well. For me, it's eating healthy, trying to work out, right? It's doing that more consistently. But those three are often you need to look at those three, doing something new, doing something again, or doing something more. And you need to balance that with the two remaining dots, which is decreasing something or stopping something altogether. I think many individuals, we will sometimes spend a lot of time on our phones. And our phones can sort of...
We've talked about that before.
Yes, we have.
Phones can have the effect of distracting our curiosity. I describe it as a fragile phenomenon, that it appears seldom in our lives. It's not frequent and it's not rare. It's sort of in the middle. But when it does happen, it's important that we protect that curiosity. And so the gray, which is about decreasing behavior, or the black dot, which is about stopping behavior altogether, is really important to making sure that our curiosity has space and margins.
Are we redirecting habits? Is that what you're saying in a sense?
Sort of,
Absolutely,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I say sort of, but yeah, absolutely. And I just got to say, I love, what Cassini's talking about is this idea of the stop doing is really important. And I think people, when we're younger in our lives, I think there comes a time when everyone wants to be yes to everything. They want to they just say yes to anything. And then I think there's people who are more reticent to say yes to anything.
Right.
But it's like, this is such a great way to think about how can I systematically, incrementally build these things, but also evaluate what I'm doing in my life and think about the things I need to.
Well, there's only so much time to do things. And so you got to cut some things out if you're going to adapt and do something new.
Right. Every yes is 1,000 no's to something else.
Yeah.
Where do you want to direct that?
I remember reading a book a few years ago, and it was Robert Kaplan, who used to be head of the Dallas Fed, and he said, don't be afraid to sort of throw some things out and do what you're enjoying or where you think that you're making a difference. And that makes a lot of sense, I think.
We've talked about the T. Boone Pickens quote, don't go, help me out with it, Jen.
Don't get distracted chasing rabbits when you're out hunting elephants. When you're out hunting elephants, don't get distracted chasing rabbits.
He could say that, right?
Yes, he could. He could say that. So you have to be sensitive to that.
So talk about the connection between memory. Oh, you're a little curious about this, aren't you?
I am curious about that.
But we're not ready to talk about that. Talk about the relationship between memory and curiosity.
Do you want to hit that first?
Sure.
Okay.
So my work as a designer, I try to design experiences that have meaning to individuals, but are also memorable. And that can be quite challenging. But I found that if you can invite people to be curious about the experience, just like you did with what's in the box, right? The very simple form
You're
of
not taking your eye off.
what's in the box is so critical, right? And that moment, I don't know what that happens in the brain, but as a designer, we know it's important to enable those situations to occur, because if you can invite somebody to be curious, they're going to have a much more powerful memory of that than if it was sort of brought about any other way. And so there's power to designing those moments. It's not easy, but there's power to it.
And I would just say, to add on to that, it is that meaning that actually helps us to encode information better and hold on. We know that those things that are anything in our lives that carry greater meaning, where we went to a birthday party, we had a trip, something that we were planning something, or we had a big presentation that was really, really important to us that carried a lot of meaning, or our kids, something, that those things tend to be better encoded over our lifetime than the mundane things that we have every day. So that's where I think that this element of curiosity is in this meaning, is that helps to make information sticky.
So what about a little bit on the negative side, the phrase, and I want you all to explain it because I thought it had a certain meaning and it doesn't. Curiosity kills the cat.
So that's half of the phrase. I think people across the country may have heard the other half of it, which is, but satisfaction brought him back, which is attributed to something, I think, in the late 1800s as well. But the first part of that, chopping the phrase off in half, where we don't get that second part, essentially tells us that maybe curiosity is something that we need to avoid. Mm-hmm. And, growing up, that can be something that parents may unintentionally do with their children, because curiosity can bring us to dangerous places as well, right? A child trying to put their finger into a wall socket, clearly not something that they should be curious about.
Or being too nosy.
Or being too nosy as well. And so that's the social component to curiosity. There's sort of two sides. One is personal, of something that will only affect me, but then also a social component that will affect the people around me as well. And how that plays out is different. Everyone's upbringing is a little bit different, but you can shape your curiosity, and that's what I think we're talking about right now. The word curiosity in Latin is the word for caring. And cura, the Latin word, that it means to care is that if I can be more curious about you, and it's a genuine curiosity, not sort of a mundane or interested in self curiosity, I can really indicate that I'm caring by asking questions, by connecting, by relating. And I think that's the power of curiosity, is that it seems to be this sort of, I'm learning all sorts of new things with each sort of resource that I look into.
How do you develop a better way to communicate with people, to be curious about your life without being nosy? I mean, what are sort of the appropriate ways to engage in that type of conversation?
I think asking questions is such a great way to think about trying to learn somebody's perspective on something, for the sake of not trying to convince them of your own perspective or to not any kind of underlying meaning like that. But really, I think part of it is so many of us have different opinions. We have biases. We have lots of different kinds of points of view on all sorts of things in the world. And just trying to understand where someone is coming from and asking that genuinely, but also being willing to share. I think that there is a risk tolerance that we have to have. I think, kind of to this point Cassini was talking about earlier, is the social risks that can come with being curious. Curiosity killed the cat. Just that part of it. But I think that if people are authentic and they really do want to know about somebody, it's probably one of the easiest ways is to start asking questions. I think there's a fine line between you're being nosy and I'm being curious. So it's probably
That's a fascinating thought, because you think about how everyone says right now we're so polarized, and that's because we're unwilling to listen and ask questions, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's different in face-to-face conversations than it would be through digital mediums as well. We may not be reading the intention correctly when it's just text on a screen, and we're maybe interpreting it through our own lens. But face-to-face, we have more power and control over how that curiosity comes as nosiness. Maybe one thing that can be a practical way to instill curiosity is just adding the phrase else, what else, how else, why else, and finding you will discover new things by just adding that word into your sentence more frequently.
So you're at the University of North Texas. How are the students now? And compare them to when you were a student or...
I think when I was a student, I was intensely curious, but my curiosity was related to me. I think this group of students, their curiosity is almost distributed, and it's a social curiosity that I find that they have moments of discovery through others in a way that I didn't. I remember going to the library and looking at books and sort of seeing a book right next to it and saying, "Oh, that's interesting."
We have the card stack.
When you have the card stack, yes. But these students are learning new things because of other people and through their social networks, and I think it's wonderful I describe it as lending and borrowing curiosity, that they're lending their curiosity to others through, I learned this thing, or I made this recipe, try it, right? These are ways that curiosity is social. And how about you, Jen?
Well, I think that just social media, I think that's one thing that's really good about social media, is that we have this ability to connect with people. I mean, I have friends around the country and around the world that I'm able to talk to, not just on the phone, but in person, not just on text, but I can FaceTime with them, or I can, have video chats with them. That helps me to get a little peek into their lives too. And so that I'm like, what is that? Well, what's that box that's sitting there? And I just think that is one of the positive things that it's come out of it.
But you're making the effort to do it.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
Where does cynicism play a role? Because I'm wondering about what makes someone not to be curious.
Yeah. So to answer that question, there's curiosity in one model is made up of two emotions. The first is trust. I need to trust that this situation is not going to harm me, or I also am putting myself in sort of a vulnerable position when I'm curious. But then there's that necessary element of surprise, that those two emotions have to be there in order for curiosity to emerge. Cynicism is very different. Cynicism is is a sense of anticipation and disgust, that I know what's going to happen. And when it does happen, I can feel a sense of disgust around that as well. And so it's rather than being open to things, as you described a moment ago, you're sort of narrowing the aperture to say, nope, I'm only going to look at this one area.
Okay.
And I just want to add to that. I think it's really important to think about this in the workplace, because cynicism is one of the components of burnout. I shouldn't just say the workplace. People get burned out in their life, right?
Yeah.
But cynicism is one of the components of burnout. And if we can help to start having more, like flipping it around and having this opposite, and really exercising and being proactive about being curious, rather than, I would say it's probably more of a default for a lot of people to be cynical. Then if we're intentional about asking questions, we might be able to change this whole attitude and this kind of negativity around.
So let's talk about children. I happen to have some grandchildren, and I'm driving in the car with them, and Granddad, why this? How that? And you get a little tired sometimes of those questions, and I try to respond. What is the best way to take that to the next level so that you are really being responsive and also perhaps adding on another dimension to that discussion?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start. I don't feel like
Okay.
I have the comprehensive answers to this, but I think modeling behavior is very important. That if your child sees you asking questions, as I did with my father, and then maybe most importantly, going out and seeking the answers to those questions as well, that you can model that behavior of, to your point, of confidence. I think humility is important to say, I don't know. Curiosity is important to say, well, what's the answer? And then confidence or courage is really needed in order to say, well, I'll find out. And those three things are...
And you take that to the next level to do the research or bring out a book or go to the internet.
And if we can model that behavior, I think that's really powerful, because children pick it up very quickly, what we say and what we do. Yes.
And it would seem to me that it would be very damaging if you shut that down.
Yeah, and I actually think that when kids ask a question, why is the sky blue? Why do you think the sky is blue? To just give it back, it's like it's modeling, but it's also encouraging them. You're asking them to explore. So I think that that's kind of a cool thing, is not always answering the questions, but asking them to answer the questions, whether it's for themselves or because you're like, I really don't know. Why? Why do you think? And I think it just does help motivate them to explore.
Where does the fun game that we've all played with children, peekaboo, hop into this?
So that's great. It's something that I use when I'm talking about curiosity to say we've all done this familiar pattern. Maybe we just haven't seen it that way. So curiosity follows this pattern, and it's sort of three steps. The first is an invitation. You get your child's attention to sort of look at them. They respond to that, which is the second part of it, by looking back at you. You put your hands in front of your face, and when you put them to the side and your child is looking back at you, there's often a reward that comes with that. So invitation, response, and reward. But curiosity is fragile. That response may not be responded to. They may not accept the response that you've given. They may ignore it. Right, that box that you have there that's sort of tantalizing
the infamous
us.
box.
I know.
It may go up on our bookshelf, and we may not come back to it for some time. So it's a familiar pattern that, again, we've all done, or we've seen it, or maybe when we were children we've had it done to us. But it's the way that we invite curiosity in people around us.
So I'm fascinated by the title that you have at the university. What do you do, and where does curiosity play into that?
So I'm a designer. I'm an interaction designer, which typically that means that we design experiences or interfaces. And I think more and more my work has become intangible. When you think about interfaces, there are things you can touch or speak to or things like that. But when you think about experiences, there's sometimes not things that you touch. Right? It's words that you use or mannerisms that you have. If you think about getting a cup of coffee, right? There's definitely the coffee that you're getting, but there's also the experience of sitting in the space. Sure. What does it smell like? What does it look like? What's the lighting like?
Right.
All of these things are important. But how can you direct that curiosity to something that might, again, bring about meaning to people in their lives.
So are you doing this to make us all happier, or are you doing it to sell a product?
Well,
Sorry to say it that way, but
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
well, if you can invite curiosity earlier, you can direct people more closely to the product. And there are many companies that embrace curiosity as a company itself. Merck, which is, I think, one of the oldest pharmaceuticals in the world. I think Merck was started 1666, somewhere around there. Curiosity is part of the Merck brand. Corgan, which is an interior design firm, they have a curiosity report every year.
Really?
And
So what's in that?
well, it's what's happening. It's almost like a trend report of what's happening right now, but characterizing it curiosity, right? It pulled you in.
Yeah.
It's given you an invitation, and you're responding to that invitation, right?
What other companies are strong with curiosity?
Yeah, I
would think Apple.
Yeah, absolutely. And curiosity takes different shapes. I think IBM is another, historically, if you look at IBM. But a company can have curiosity as its moniker. But I think practically we look at our managers to say, does my manager allow me to be curious? Am I rewarded when I go off and I'm curious about a problem
Look
or a
outside
problem
the box.
in the making? Exactly. And so, the company can say we're curious, but how do the management practices do that?
So I would think, and I'm sorry if I'm making any stereotypes here, but I would think an accountant has a different kind of curiosity than, say, a National Geographic photographer, for instance. So do companies now really try to measure, and are you able to sort of measure different kinds of curiosity?
I think we're starting to look at this a lot more because it's an important element. And I just wanted to add also to what Cassini was saying is that it's not just reward for going down the road of being curious, but it's also having a culture that's tolerant of what happens if that curiosity doesn't pan out.
It's okay to fail.
It's okay to fail. And so I think that's very important too in families with kids, right? So that if parents are always saying it's okay to fail, then it's helping our kids to be more curious because then they'll be willing to explore without fear of consequence. I think if they get in trouble on something because they were curious.
Curiosity takes bravery.
Absolutely. But and on that, there's a book by Alina Tuggin. I'm forgetting the name of the title, but in the introduction, she talks about picking up her child from school, very young child, and she asks the child, like any parent does, what did you learn in school today? To which the child responds, one word, nothing, which never makes a parent happy as well. And she says, nothing? What do you mean you learned nothing in school today? To which the child says, well, my teacher says you learn by making mistakes, and I didn't make any, which is a profound sort of criticism of, to your point, of we need to encourage the making of mistakes, but maybe most importantly, what happens when you do that? Because innovation has a high failure rate. And if you're going to truly innovate, you're going to have a lot of failures in order to get to sort of that final product or final state that you're trying to get
And
to.
management needs to be willing to incentivize people to do that.
Absolutely.
Now, as a good academic, you have different scales and bullet points, and I wonder if you might walk us through what you have here, this different types of curious people.
So we tend to think, are you curious? As sort of a yes or no. And a better question is, how are you curious? Which allows us to open up that possibility space. So a researcher named Todd Kashdan and his team found that there's 5 dimensions to curiosity. One of those is joyous exploration. And this is kind of what we think about whenever we think about curiosity, that motivation to explore that
It's
we were talking
enjoyable.
about.
It's fun.
It's absolutely enjoyable, or it can be
Okay.
enjoyable. Not always.
Right.
That kind of leads us to the second one, which is deprivation sensitivity. That we might avoid going out with a friend in order to find out what happens in a movie. We might deprive ourselves of certain things in order to sort of explore others, right? And that's a form of curiosity that opens up that space, and that's related to stress tolerance. If you've ever had an international flight, particularly if you're not sitting up in the front of the cabin and you're sitting in the back,
Yes.
there's a bit of stress tolerance that you have to
A lot.
undertake in order to say, I want to know what's on the other side. I want to go to that destination, and that's important. So in addition to stress tolerance, there's that social curiosity that we talked about, where you can be, and this isn't a form of nosiness, right? I suppose it could manifest in that way, but it's really just genuinely thinking like an anthropologist. I wonder what it's like sitting from Jen's perspective, right? What is Jen feeling in this moment? And then that last one is thrill seeking, where this could be anything from jumping out of a plane, parachuting out of a plane, to gambling as well. It's sort of that thrill that we get of, what's going to happen when we turn over that card.
So one of the things that I thought was interesting in watched one of the speeches you gave, presentations, is that just trying something new, it can be so simple. And this is really silly, but I tried to brush my teeth with my left hand. Dentist won't be happy. I'm not going to try that many times. But you can push different things. And we all know somebody, I won't say her name, but who has actually tried to do something new over 4,000 times.
Yes.
It's a wonderful challenge to do that.
It is. And I think that one of the biggest lessons out of that is it's just incremental change. And just one thing that you think is a small thing. I think that people think a big change or being innovative or being curious has to have some big, celebration or has to be something big. But everything that we do that's small, especially that if you're like, I wonder about this, and just doing one thing that kind of helps to answer.
And you have some control over your life and are doing it. So, ladies first.
Okay.
What is in that box?
Am I supposed to guess first?
No.
Or open?
You should open.
Okay.
Because we only have 24 seconds.
Okay. I'm opening.
So what is that?
Oh my gosh.
You got to share.
Okay.
Tell everyone what it is.
Brownies.
Brownies. So
yes.
who says Perspectives Matters doesn't take care of our guests?
That's right.
Want to thank everybody for being with us today. And as noted in the open, those who watch Perspectives Matter tend to be people who are curious and who scratch below the surface, open boxes, and go beyond the headlines. Today, we heard from our two experts that being curious is not only beneficial to our health, we might gain some calories, but we can also take certain concrete steps. We can shape our curiosity, build empathy, and be more caring. And before closing, let me remind you to go to the Center for the Brain Health's website. It's a wonderful source of information about how all of us can strengthen our brains and overall health by incorporating into your daily regimen easy to incorporate good habits. Thank you all for being curious, watching this week's program, where we talk about things that matter with people who care.